Shadow Slave by Guiltythree. Chapter 37, Getting to Know Each Other. Sunny was slowly growing fond of having conversations in the dark. Without the burden of light, people were more relaxed and honest. It reminded him of the frequent blackouts that used to sweep through the city when he was a little kid. His family had no choice but to huddle together and spend a few hours doing nothing but talking to each other. Now, these dark hours had become some of his most precious memories. He was silent for a few moments and then said, "Since we're going to be depending on each other, should we share what abilities and memories we have at our disposal?" This was a logical suggestion. If they were going to fight side by side, knowing each other's strengths was more or less vital. Still, he noticed Nephi's glancing in his direction with a guarded look on her face. Luckily, he was obscured by darkness. "I'll start," Sunny said, both to show his sincerity and to reveal information about himself in a controlled manner. If he took the initiative to talk, he still had to tell the truth, but how much and to what extent was still for him to decide. If they were to ask and he had to answer, however, things would become unpredictable. "My attributes give me an affinity to shadows. I also have a slight affiliation to divinity. Lastly, I am prone to finding myself in unlikely situations." Cassie listened carefully, and then lowered her head, as though embarrassed. "Ah, he is telling the truth. Not that we doubted your honesty." "Why not? I spent so much time earning the reputation of a pathological liar." Sunny cleared his throat and smiled, hiding his nervousness. "Really? That's good to know. But why are you so sure that I am being honest?" The blind girl shifted a little. "Oh, that's my ability. I can see people's attributes. Sometimes, I also receive, visions. They can be about the future or the past. I mean, that's what I think. It only happened a couple of times." Sunny swallowed, but then relaxed. "So, she is an oracle of sorts. Luckily, her insight is limited to attributes, otherwise, I'd be in real trouble. Still, I'll have to be careful around her." He finally realized how the blind girl had known about his birthday. The question was whether she had seen it in a vision of the future or in a vision of the past. If it was the former, was it safe to assume that he would certainly be able to celebrate at least one more birthday? Or did knowing the future actually affect it and changed it? For example, after learning that he was definitely going to survive, Sunny might have naturally relaxed and lowered his guard. Then, he would die as a result of it. It surely seemed possible, right? That's assuming that the future could be changed. But maybe it wasn't. Then, feeling his head hurting, Sunny decided to avoid this line of thought for now. Instead, he hid his inner turmoil and said in a friendly tone, "That's a good ability. Speaking of abilities, you have already seen mine. My shadow can move independently and explore. It can't affect the material world, but we share sight and hearing. That way, I can spot danger before encountering it. The shadow is fast and stealthy, it can go anywhere and is almost impossible to notice. Oh, I can also see in the dark." He smiled, expecting the girls to understand and appreciate the utility of his shadow scout. Their reaction, however, was a bit strange. Nephi slowly turned her head in his direction, while Cassie became a bit pale and raised her hands to cover her chest. "Ah, what?" Nephi's frowned and said in a flat tone, "Have you ever used your ability in the academy?" Sunny blinked. What a strange question. "In the academy?" "Sure, of course." "Why?" "Oh, right, they think that I'm a pervert." "Crap." Before the girls could say anything, he hurriedly raised his hand and blurted, "But I have never used it to do anything improper. You have to believe me." Fortunately, it was the honest truth. However, both Nephi's and Cassie looked skeptical. Sunny gritted his teeth. "I had more important things to do than whatever you're thinking about. I spent almost every waking hour learning how to survive." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. "I haven't seen you in class, even once." Sunny chuckled. "Of course, you didn't. While you were busy wiping the floor with other sleepers, I was studying wilderness survival." It was Changing Star's turn to blink. "Wilderness, what? There is such a course?" Cassie seemed equally puzzled. "Yes, there is. It might seem like an afterthought for most people, but for an outskirts kid like me, who never went to a fancy school or saw a private tutor, learning how to survive in the wilderness is the difference between life and death. Without it, I would have drowned the moment we were sent to the dream realm. On a rare occasion, Nephi's looked completely bewildered. She rubbed her wrists and stared thoughtfully in his direction. I see. I didn't know. Sunny grimaced and struggled to keep the venom from sipping into his voice. When he finally spoke, his tone was light and amiable. That's okay. It's natural for someone of your status not to know. When he mentioned her status, a strange smile appeared on the changing star's face. But in the end, she didn't reply. Sunny continued, anyway, that's my ability. As for memories, I have 3. One is an armor, one is a sword, and the last one is a really loud bell. Now it was their turn to share. After a short pause, Nephi spoke, my attributes give me an affinity to light and fire, as well as a strong affiliation to divinity. I have 2 memories, a rope. While she was speaking, Sunny was looking at Cassie, trying to read her expression. From what he saw, Nephi's was telling the truth, but also, not the whole truth. And judging by how hard the blind girl was trying to hide her true feelings, the secret hiding among changing stars' attributes was not at all trivial. Interesting. And a sword. The rope is very sturdy and can change its length. The sword is very sharp and can protect its wielder against soul attacks, to a certain extent. My ability can be used to heal. Sunny didn't miss the wording of the last part. Can be used to heal, does this mean that its main purpose was something else? He was pretty sure that Nephi's would not reveal all of her cards, just like him. However, healing abilities were extremely rare. Having one that could heal, but was not limited to healing, that would be simply unheard of. But then again, she was Changing Star, one of the few people in history to receive a true name in the first nightmare. If Sunny were to consider his own aspect ability, nothing seemed impossible. I wonder what her aspect rank is. Outwardly, he pretended to be excited. You're a healer. That's great. Having a healer among us is incredible luck. Cassie nodded and smiled. Neph is also an amazing fighter. You should have seen her dealing with those scavengers. Well, I also did not actually see it. But it sounded very scary. Sunny didn't need anyone to tell him how formidable of a warrior Nephi's was. He had seen it with his own 2 eyes. Sort of. Actually, they were his shadow's eyes. Well, whatever it had instead of eyes. Meanwhile, Cassie sighed. It's my turn. My attributes are nothing special. I guess I have an affinity to revelations and fate. My ability is like I told you before. It's not very useful. About my memories, I have 3, the bottle, the wooden staff and this armor. You already know about the bottle. The staff can create wind. The armor is actually of the awakened rank, Neph gave it to me when we met. It has a very powerful protective charm. So, she's not only carrying Cassie on her back, she even gave away her only clothes. An awakened rank armor, at that. What is Nephi's thinking about? The blind girl turned away and added after a while, I used to be a pretty decent fencer, before. Now I can't really fight. The last 2 sentences were obviously related to her flaw. Sunny and Nephi's, however, both chose to keep their secret. Despite the fact that knowing your companion's flaw was also important for cooperation and having each other's backs, sharing something like that demanded a very high level of trust. Right now, there was no trust between them. And even if there was, Sunny did not plan to ever share his flaw with anyone. Nephi's, too, seemed to have a lot of secrets. After a while, he said, good. That's good. I think we have enough tools to survive, provided we use them right. I guess it's time to sleep. In the darkness, Nephi's tilted her head, listening to his words with a distant look. All right. I'll take watch first. Sunny decided to be helpful and said, actually, my shadow doesn't sleep. It can wake us up if something happens. Changing Star slowly smiled. I'll take watch first. Feeling a bit of coldness in her voice, Sunny sighed and shrugged. Suit yourself. What are you going to watch, huh? You can't even see anything. Whatever. Just don't blame me when something giant swallows us in the middle of the night." Then he suddenly shuddered. Wait, that was not a death flag, right? Right, of course not. No way. Chapter 38, Questions in the Dark. Sleep was avoiding Sunny. For a while, he sat silently in the darkness, listening to the calming rumbling of the waves. In this rare moment of respite, memories of the past few days came flooding into his mind. However, he was too tired to seriously think about anything. He was warm, full, and relatively safe. For now, that was more than enough. Soon, the rhythm of Kasha's breathing changed, indicating that she fell asleep. Nephi's was guarding the camp, motionless and, as always, a bit distant. With her silver hair and fair skin, she looked like an alabaster statue. Sunny sighed. He struggled for a bit, and then said quietly, "Hey. Can I ask you a question?" Nephi's glanced at him and shrugged. The lack of an audible response clearly indicated that she remembered about his ability to see in the dark. "Sure. Would it be too personal?" Sunny hesitated. "I thought you legacies come into the spell with a whole inherited arsenal of memories. I mean, that's supposed to be your main advantage. How come you only had 3? Nephi's was silent for a few moments. "Actually, I only had 2. The rope came from Cassie." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh. I see." Realizing that her answer wasn't really an answer, Nephi's thought for a while and added, "We lost most of our memories when my father passed away. The ones that remained were sold one by one over the years, to keep the family afloat. This sword and armor came from my first nightmare. So that's how it was." Sunny realized that the fall of the Immortal Flame clan might have been more thorough than he had thought. Still, something about it didn't make sense. Surely, with your clan's reputation and standing, there were other ways to make money. Without any strong reaction, Nephi simply said, "There were other reasons." Then, she unexpectedly turned her head in his direction. "Can I ask you a question in return?" Sunny swallowed. "Yeah, go ahead." Nephi's tilted her head. "How did you know that I'm a legacy?" "What?" "That's it. Simple. I heard Castor mention it. He was scolding other sleepers to make them treat you with respect." She gave him a nod and turned away. What thoughts were hidden behind her calm gray eyes, Sunny did not know. Some time had passed before he gathered enough courage to ask the question that he really wanted to ask. Before doing it, though, he made sure that Cassie was sound asleep and lowered his voice. "Can I ask another question?" Without getting a negative response, he continued, "Why are you burdening yourself with her?" A corner of Changing Star's mouth curled up slightly. "Why? Wouldn't you?" Sunny gritted his teeth, feeling the flaw pushing the truthful answer out of his mouth. No. To be honest, he wanted to believe to the last moment that the answer would be yes. But one of the things he had lost after the nightmare was the ability to lie to himself. Truth was merciless. It's not that Sunny did not pity the blind girl or didn't want to help her. It's just that he knew with certainty that it was simply not something he could do. He was barely able to save himself, let alone carry a helpless person across the dream realm. If he tried, they would just die together. Still, he couldn't help but be a little disappointed in himself. Nephi's, however, did not seem to judge him. She showed no reaction at all. After a few moments, she simply said, "Because I want to." Because she wants to. That was not the response Sunny expected to hear. He was pretty sure that she would either lecture him about virtue and compassion or disclose some obscure way to make Cassie's seemingly weak ability incredibly useful. However, she did neither. Nephi's expected him to believe that she was putting her life in danger, to the point of sacrificing an awakened armor-type memory, because that was something she simply wanted to do. Ridiculous. At first, he dismissed her response as a non-answer. But the more he thought about it, the more disturbed he felt. Because, maybe, it was actually the truth. Due to the circumstances of his life, Sunny had never really done things because he wanted to. Most of the time, he was doing them because he needed to. It was never a question of want, it was always a question of must. For him, this was a basic rule of life. But was it really? Or was it just a matter of perspective? Nephi's had certain advantages in her upbringing, but they weren't as ample as he had imagined. She had no wealth and no arsenal of relics to empower her. However, she did have a mentality that was different from Sunny's. It wasn't impossible for her to have the audacity to disregard need in favor of something as frivolous as desire, and do things that a normal person like Sunny would never do. Like helping a blind girl simply because that was what Nephi's wanted to do. Perhaps, that mentality was the greatest advantage of all. Perhaps, that was the real barrier that separated legacies from the rest of them. That was a lot to think about. However, before Sunny could gather his thoughts, Nephi suddenly spoke again. My turn. Does she mean it's her turn to ask a question? Indeed, that was what she meant. Changing Star once again turned to Sunny and, after a long pause, suddenly asked, do you know the legend of Odysseus? What? Who? What sort of a weird question is that? Bewildered, Sunny shook his head. Then, remembering that she couldn't see him, he said, no. Nephi sighed and turned away. A few moments later, she softly said, Odysseus was a hero in an ancient war. In the legends, some humans back then had powers akin to the awakened. Achilles with an aspect of indestructible body, Diomedes that was so ferocious even the god of war was wary of him, Ajax who was as strong as a giant. Odysseus was not the strongest, and not the bravest. However, he was the most cunning. Sunny blinked, staring at the silver-haired girl. What? Where did this come from? Why is she suddenly so eloquent? Meanwhile, Nephi's continued, in the end, Odysseus's cunning ended the war, and he prepared to sail home. However, the gods cursed him to endlessly wander the seas, never to return. Over the years, he survived one horror after another and lost all of his companions. Then, shipwrecked, he found himself on an island where the beautiful fairy, Calypso, lived. Changing Star's ethereal, strangely wistful voice resounded in the darkness, creating an enthralling atmosphere. Sunny couldn't help but listen with the utmost attention. Calypso fell in love with Odysseus and invited him to her palace. For many years, they lived together in harmony. The island was like a paradise, filled with all kinds of wonders, delicacies, and delights. As long as loving Calypso was by his side, Odysseus was even immortal. But, the longer he stayed, the more time he spent sitting on the shore, looking at the sea with bleak eyes. Nephi smiled. In the end, Odysseus built a makeshift boat and abandoned the island, leaving all its delights, the beautiful fairy, and even his immortality behind. So, my question is, why did he leave? Sunny blinked. What? What kind of a mind game was that? He even considered that Nephi's was mocking him, but it didn't seem to be the case. It looked like she was sincerely interested in the answer. Weirdo. He thought for a bit, and then said without too much conviction, maybe it was because he was far away from home. A fleeting smile appeared on Nephi's face. Far away, from home. All right. After that, she turned away and lowered her head, becoming like a statue again. It seemed like their conversation was over. Grumbling internally, Sunny lay down and tried to fall asleep. However, the image of bleak-eyed Odysseus kept appearing in his mind. After a while, he whispered, well, did he make it back home? Soon, Nephi's replied. Yes. He returned to his wife and son, and they lived happily ever after. Satisfied, Sunny smiled and turned on his side. When he was already half asleep, he heard Changing Star's quiet voice once again. This time, it was barely audible and aimless, as though not directed at anyone. Odysseus was the first human to break the will of gods. In the morning, Sunny and Nephi's were the first to get up. While the sun was rising and the sea was retreating, they made a fire and began preparing a simple breakfast. With Kasha still asleep, they did not talk to each other much. It was like last night's conversation did not happen. However, after some time, they somehow ended up discussing the plan for the next few days. Nephi's had some ideas. With what you told us about scavengers crowding to the west, the logical step would be to start moving east as soon as we can. Of course, north and south are also acceptable, but that won't put as much space between us and the enemy. Sunny nodded, agreeing with that logic. We have explored to the east a little, but not enough to confidently make it to the next high point in a day. That's why the best course of action would be to spend today scouting a path to that group of cliffs over there and move the camp tomorrow. He sighed. Do you have any idea where we are? Would there be a human citadel to the east? Nephi shook her head. I've never heard of a region that fits the characteristics of this place. In any case, we have to move to find out more. We'll either find a citadel, encounter an unconquered gateway, or die. East is as good of a direction as any. Plus, it's the safest, because there's a horde of monsters to the west. At that point, Cassie suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was a little pale. She looked nervous and excited. Nephi's frowned. Cassie. What's the matter? The blind girl turned to them and smiled. A vision. I had a vision. Like a prophetic dream. Sunny thought, trying to come to terms with this new reality of someone being able to see the future. Or the past. Meanwhile, Changing Star stretched her hand, as though prepared to summon her sword. Are we in danger? Cassie energetically shook her head. No, it's not that. People. I saw a castle full of people. She smiled and pointed with her finger. I don't know how far it is, but I'm sure that it's in that direction. Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, not knowing whether to be glad or petrified. Cassie's small, delicate finger was confidently pointing west. Chapter 39, Journey to the West. In the ensuing silence, the smile slowly disappeared from Cassie's face, replaced by confusion. Feeling the sudden tension, she asked, what's wrong? Sunny sighed. No, nothing is wrong. It's just that direction is the one we wanted to avoid. After some thought, he added, that's where I came from yesterday. There's a lot of scavengers down there. The blind girl's face fell. Oh. Nephi's, who was quietly listening to them, gave him an indecipherable look and finally spoke, tell us more about the castle. A shadow of the previous excitement returned to Cassie's eyes. With a serious nod, she began describing her vision. I dreamt of a vast, ruined city built of weathered stone. It was surrounded by tall, impregnable walls. Various monsters were wandering its narrow streets. In the center of the city, there was a hill, and on that hill stood a magnificent castle. She smiled. But there were no monsters in the castle. Instead, it was full of people. I'm sure that they were awakened. Some were guarding the walls, some were going about their lives without a care in the world. There was food, safety, and laughter. Well, that sounds great. If this castle really existed, then all of their problems would be solved. Sunny cleared his throat. Did you see anything else? Cassie frowned, trying to remember. Then, her face cleared. Yes. I saw Sunny leading me through the gates of the castle. That means we will make it. A brilliant smile appeared on her doll-like face, beaming with so much joy that Sunny couldn't help but curl his lips. Inwardly, however, he was stuck on a certain detail of Cassie's vision. It was that, when talking about reaching the castle, the blind girl only mentioned the two of them. Was there some meaning behind it? Sunny turned his head a little and secretly glanced at Nephi's, trying to discern if she had picked up on that little discrepancy, too. Changing Star, however, was as enigmatic as ever. Without showing much emotion, she thought for a while, and then slowly nodded. Okay. Then we will go west. While the sea was still retreating, they had their breakfast and then spent some time planning for the journey and preparing to abandon the temporary camp. In the process, Sunny had a chance to get to know the girls a little better. It was then that he came to a sudden realization, which almost made his head explode from bafflement. That mind-blowing realization had to do with Nephi's. Back when they first met in front of the academy's gates, Sunny had formed a certain impression of the confident, distant girl. Later, her behavior and the different revelations about Changing Star's past only served to reinforce that impression. Nephi seemed to exist a bit apart from the world. She was mysterious, aloof, and rather cool. Her taciturn character and strange speech patterns made people interacting with her feel unnerved and rattled, often revealing more than they had been planning to. The less she talked, the more she seemed to know. That silent, indifferent confidence was arresting, and sometimes even oppressive. However, that impression turned out to be completely wrong. The actual truth behind the matter had nothing to do with being cool and aloof. After talking to her a bit more and observing their interactions with Cassie, Sonny almost fainted when he realized that Nephi's was simply an incredibly, ridiculously, painfully awkward person. It was as though she had no idea how to talk to people. Every time she tried to convey something, she would either use the wrong words or stumble in the middle of the sentence and fall silent. Her tone never matched what she was trying to say. Often, she would forget to put correct intonations in her speech, making questions sound like statements or vice versa. Added to that was the fact that, like many introverted people, Nephi's was not in a habit of openly showing her emotions. It's not that she didn't have feelings, it's just that she was really bad at emoting them. As a result, her face always looked cold and neutral. That's why, most of the time, she simply chose to talk as little as possible or not to talk at all. All of that added up together, then multiplied by her general weirdness, was ultimately responsible for creating the false image of a mysterious, unapproachable ice princess. When in fact, she was just shy and completely inept in communicating with people. After coming to that realization, Sonny tried with all his might but still failed to stop himself from staring at Nephi's with wide eyes. He just barely managed to not let his jaw hang open. What the hell? That's not in line with how a protagonist should be. In his mind, Nephi's had definitely been the type of person to be the main character of any event. At the center stage, there were always confident, strong people like her and Castor. People like himself and Cassie, on the other hand, were relegated to exist far away in the background. Now, however. No, that line of thought was also wrong. The fact that Changing Star had problems with expressing herself and lacked social skills did not mean that she was not strong. In fact, it might have meant the opposite. She still achieved everything that she had achieved, but with the added layer of adversity. She was still dangerous. At that moment, Nephi's finally noticed that Sonny was staring at her. She looked at him and, after a long pause, asked in an emotionless tone, "What?" He blinked, extricating himself from this sudden flood of thoughts, and cleared his throat. Nothing. I was just going to ask when are we setting off." Nephi's appeared to be thinking. After a while, she turned away and said, "Soon." You really can't manage more than one word, can you?" Utterly bewildered, Sonny hid his emotions and smiled. All right then." In the gray light of morning, they abandoned the tall hill and ventured west, retracing their steps from yesterday. Knowing the path, the small party made quick progress. Nephi's was walking in front, her sword arm ready to strike at any moment. A bit behind her was Sonny. This time, the responsibility of holding the golden rope and guiding Cassie along was entrusted to him. Of course, the actual person, creature, leading them was his shadow. It scouted ahead, carefully observing the labyrinth for signs of danger. The labyrinth was just as it was before, confusing and seemingly endless. Crimson blades of coral protruded from the black mud, creating a vast, tangled forest. However, today something about it felt different. It wasn't long before the shadow stumbled onto a mass of hulking, hungry scavengers.